Well, welcome everyone. I'm Daisy McGowan. I'm the director of GOCA, the Galleries of Contemporary Art at UCCS, and this is part of our Fall 2020 virtual studio visit series. And I am very honored to have Gregg Deal joining us today and to be doing a studio visit. Thanks so much, Gregg, for saying yes to being part of this series.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really great. We had an in-person studio visit. It's been a couple of years, like we were talking about earlier. As a curator with contemporary art focus, it's a huge part of my practice to get out and visit with artists and studios. Year before last, I almost hit 200 studio visits, and so the pace of that can be pretty intense. And so when things started shutting down, it's not super safe to go into those spaces. Maybe I was really grateful that the technology was there, and that and it really has meant a lot. We have had one spring series of these, which was a little more focused on local artists. This fall series has branched out a bit. We featured some alumni that are out in New York. And you're an artist who recently came to the Pikes Peak region, a little bit east of Colorado Springs, on the eastern edge of Colorado Springs, but you've shown up right away across the whole Front Range. I actually learned about your work first in Denver, very prominent embrace of your work in Colorado Springs now, which has been fantastic. I've been in this role for 10 years this fall. And, I was in Colorado Springs for 10 years before that, working at Colorado College before that. So seen sort of arc of time. And when I first learned about your work from Louise Martirano at RedLine in Denver, she said, you've got to connect with Gregg. So I'm really grateful that you are in our community, and thanks for participating in this. You bring that wonderful perspective of you were on the East Coast for quite a long time, and then more recently coming to Colorado, and sort of just instantly, your embrace of the community is really, it's really shown with what the impact you've had. And so, so with that, would you tell us a little bit about your background a little more? And then we can talk a little bit about your work and your process and what you're working on right now.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I grew up in Utah, and it was everything you would expect it to be. I am Indigenous. My mother was born on our reservation, the Lake Paiute Tribe, and my father's white. But I grew up in Park City, Utah, which sounds super privileged. It was really strange. My parents made just enough money for us to be poor around other rich people. And I had always gravitated towards creating work. And so I've always drawn, I've always done something. That kind of led into graffiti, and that kind of led into, getting into some trouble. And then I ended up meeting my now wife, and she was in her last semester of school in Utah, and she was from Washington, D.C. So she graduated and moved to DC, and I started school. So I was 24, and I just kind of waited and sort of piddled around for a while. But when I was ready to go to school, I was actually really focused, which when I was young was kind of tough for me to do sometimes. So I went to George Mason University, which is in Fairfax, Virginia, and kind of made my bones in DC from that point on. And it was just interesting time-wise because DC is not really an art-driven city. It has art, it always has had art, but it's really divided, and the only art that's selling is, people are creating classic stuff that like senators will buy and put in their brownstones on Capitol Hill. And so I was part of a group of people that were ultimately creating contemporary works. And things were starting to escalate, and I was starting to get some recognition. My very first performance art piece was called The Last American Indian on Earth, which happened in 2013. And I sort of attribute that to kind of putting me on the map with my work. And of course, while all that was happening, my wife and I were trying to really sort of recover from the recession, because there was a lot of residual effects on the recession, particularly I think for creative people. And so we moved around a little bit, and I in 2014 was asked by John Lukovic at the Denver Art Museum to participate in a native art residency at the Denver Art Museum in Denver, and saw that as an opportunity to get off the East Coast, where we lived for 17 years almost, and come back east. I had no desire to go back to Utah, and so Colorado made sense. It's just on the other side of the Rockies there, and the environment is the same more or less, and so I just saw that as a chance to sort of move. And I mean, it was also because I was traveling across the country. I do a lot of speaking engagements and do a lot of other, art installations, performance work and everything, and sort of being more towards the middle of the country makes that a little easier too. But I think like most people, you come to Colorado and you just fall in love with it all over again. I mean, it's like Utah, but it's not Utah. And I'm just pretty happy to be here. And so we've been here for 5 years, and we started in the Springs. And of course, I have a pretty good sized family. I have 5 kids, and my wife and I have been married for 21 years now. And so we needed the space. So we're farther south. It's a little more economical. So.
Yeah, I think you're in a really interesting geographic location where, the plains and the mountains sort of interface there. I find it, that high desert plains very beautiful. We were out at the Pawnee National Grasslands recently, and I know a lot of people want to go right now, especially everybody's going to the mountains, looking at the leaves, and the mountains are special. And especially if you grew up in Park City, I'm sure there was a lot of familiarity with being back near the mountains. But Colorado Springs is interesting too, because it's actually kind of far away from ski resorts. And so it has that really interesting geographic siting there. And Pikes Peak is the furthest east mountain, right, in the Rockies, I think. Sun hits. So, well, I'm grateful that you made the move. I remember hearing about that project with Denver Art Museum, and you connected with Denver. But what I really was excited to see is how much you connected as well in Colorado Springs, which we were talking before that we started recording about your most recent work there, a monumental scale mural featuring your daughter Sage on the side of one of the downtown Colorado Springs buildings, and that someone asked you, why did you do that in Colorado Springs? And so I kind of want to dive in there with, we can talk about what you're working on right now and highlight what your practice is generally, but how has that been for you to be in Colorado Springs? What are some of the positives? It's a very conservative community. A lot of people from the outside have a perception of it, I think, is even more conservative than a lot of us who live there, which, when you dig in and meet people, you find that there's people from a wide range of backgrounds, but it's certainly a legitimate title as well, that it is pretty conservative. So how's that been for you and your family?
I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I think before we moved here, I think that my wife pointed out, she's like, this is the second most politically conservative city in the country. And there's concerns with that. I mean, especially on the East Coast, where things are really, really, they're pretty wide open. Like I'm brown enough to be brown, but I'm, also, light enough to sort of blend in a place like the East Coast. And that's just simply not the case here. Because depending on how I wear my hair will depend on how people will interact with me. If my hair's long, if I put it up, I'm suddenly a Mexican, so there's a lot of weird things to traverse in that way, which is actually how I grew up as well. It's not different. It's not too different from Utah in that way. But that's probably, I've also, go ahead.
If you grew up that way, there's probably also a lot of sort of, when you grow up with that, I think there's probably some residual stuff that it's probably hard to revisit in some ways, or frustrating anyways.
Yeah, no, it totally is. I mean, I don't want to belittle, post-traumatic stress, but there's definitely some post-traumatic stress. And, but I've built something within my household and within my work where my kids have a really safe space within that. They're not going through the same things that I did, because I was, my parents, obviously my parents loved me, they cared about me, but I don't think they really understood how to even traverse a lot of this stuff. And so that's been interesting. But, I've also found, especially the downtown Colorado Springs area, to be very receptive. That mural, Take Back the Power, it exists because there are allies in those spaces that facilitate that saw the vision of what I had and an opportunity to make it happen. And so I think we can always find those spaces, and honestly, I don't know that piece is terribly political, social for sure. But nowadays, of course, we're just putting a political label on everything. And in this case, if it has to do with race, then it must be some liberal agenda. And I just really don't think that that's what it is. But I'm happy to argue with anybody otherwise. So.
Yeah, well, and really ultimately raising awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And, it's like, it's so important. When I saw that going up downtown, I know who some of those allies are. I was really thrilled that people are continuing to kind of push for that. But also talking with a lot of artists, of color that are working and living here, that representation really matters a lot too. And it's your daughter on there, and that's really special. But also, like I was talking earlier as well about how Colorado as a whole, I think, and Colorado Springs in particular, has this sort of whitewashed, like cowboy fantasy of the West. Like your shirt, you've got a punk band on your shirt, the Interrupters. It sort of interrupts that narrative in a really beautiful and powerful way. And it's, like the title says, take back the power. Because whoever sort of writes the narrative for a visual space, that's a lot of power, right? And if the only representation is this like fantasy version of the West, where, that's been frankly hard to stomach being downtown, and also just across Colorado. It's sort of a Colorado thing. I think things are shifting and people are broadening, but it certainly was really refreshing to see that added to the visual landscape. Is that going to be up for a year or longer? Or?
It will be up for as long as that building is up. And in fact, when we were having a discussion about doing something, I was offered a small building that I think one of the colleges acquired for something. I don't know the exact details, but it was a 1-story building. And it has windows and an entrance and everything. And so there's just not the same amount of space. And so Claire Swinford was, really one of the facilitators of this. And she was like, do you want this or do you want this? This building's only going to be up temporarily. And I said, I don't care. I want it up because it's going to be so big, and it just needs the space, the room to breathe. And it's also, in terms of murals, a lot of murals sort of have to take up the entire space, that you have to fill every square inch. I just wanted to do a portrait, a freestanding portrait that would just be in the space. And I was interested in that. And I don't know, because I think everybody was like, oh, okay, like we can do that. Not really sure of like what that would look like or how that would sort of turn out. And once we're actually doing it, I mean, that thing is 77 feet tall. So there's a halo around her head, and the apex of that is 77 feet. And until you're standing on a boom lift at 77 feet, you don't realize how tall that is. But this is the largest piece I've done. I'm very proud of it. I'll sometimes head to Meinigers to, get some art supplies, and I pass Pikes Peak and I can just see it like 3 blocks away. You can just see it. And it's just super incredible. And Sage, my oldest, who that is a picture of, she rolls with me quite a bit. And so we'll go to the art store. She'll just come with me, and she'll always have a lookout for it. She's like, there it is. I know her, and it's just, there's a lot of elements to that. But, beyond the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue, which I think is the center point of this piece, is just also modern contemporary representation. That this is like a living, breathing person. She's wearing her favorite band T-shirt. The halo, denotes divinity. Some people are like, "Oh, is the halo? Is it about heaven? Is it about afterlife and death and all this?" And I said, no, it's about divinity. This idea that a lot of early Renaissance paintings were all based on sort of, or at least the sort of Immaculate Conception paintings had these halos that denote divinity, but that divinity has never been allotted or sort of given to Indigenous people or anybody that was not white European. And so I put that there as a symbol of divinity for our people. Our women are divine, our children are divine, our elders are divine. Our two-spirit, which is sort of our fancy way of saying, LGBTQ plus, that they have a place in our communities. They are by nature divine, that these are divine individuals. And so that's what that's there for, is to sort of a note of that divinity. Also maybe challenging sort of Western Judeo-Christian perception of divinity as it exists sort of within the Christian industrial complex, which is not to say anything about religion, but is to say about the machine that is ultimately, pushing out all of these different agendas and, focus on the family and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, there's a lot layered in there. It's truly iconic. It's an icon for contemporary times, and I'm thrilled to hear that it's going to be there as long as the building's there. It's sort of interesting, isn't it, when there's shifts happening like that in spaces? That's a lot of times when that public art comes in and is allowed, like this building. For a long time in Colorado Springs, I think Claire was part of a group working to end this. They had restrictions on murals because they considered them advertising, and you can only have a certain amount of advertising on your building. And so, I think Denver, in a lot of ways, with Crush and all the murals sort of popping up, and obviously that's something that's been going on worldwide for much longer. But it is great to see that shifting in Colorado Springs as well. It feels to me like I don't know, it just gave me a lot of hope for the future for our community, which will continue, I'm sure, to be complex and layered, but that there's space and that's brought in to really, I think downtown, you could argue, was a political power center. City Hall's down there, a lot of the marquee businesses, and there's a lot of development happening down there now. So how incredibly cool that that is part of the visual landscape as well.
I'm pretty proud of it, and honestly humbled too. I mean, I know there were some Black Lives Matter protests nearby. I saw pictures of a young woman being arrested by police in front of the mural in that parking lot, and so there's I think a way that these things sort of exist in those spaces that are both innocuous and not, and that they can be both of those things. But I think that can also be sort of the power of art in public, particularly art that has sort of an activist message to it. That photograph breaks my heart, but it's also like, yeah, that's what it is, Black and brown people, and in this case specifically, brown women being represented and also being arrested in front of this is just kind of mind blowing.
Yeah. Wow. Whew. Yeah, and pulling on that graphic or illustration, sort of graphic sensibility, printmaking, and getting that media out to the public. And so as you're thinking, I'm looking at what's behind you there, the posters, and obviously there's text. You didn't use any text, but you didn't really need to. There's so much layered into that I like how you talked about leaving space around it and really letting it resonate in that space, and the height of it and the scale of it is really important too. But it's definitely in that tradition of street art and printmaking and stickers and everything, sort of putting out these messages that sort of just dig under the surface of the power structures and say, let's consider some other ways to live here. So that
I think you can see, I mean, and you can see it here, and I can show you some work in the way that it sort of, spans across, because I usually will create work that exists in multiple spaces, or that has the ability to exist in multiple spaces. That mural is not one of them, but she is wearing a t-shirt of her favorite band, which is like this punk ska band. And that's something that I've been working with in my regular work. I was moved by Jeffrey Gibson's work when he had an exhibition up at the Denver Art Museum, and he had these, these large beaded pieces, and he would put text in there from his favorite songs, or like quotes from his favorite, his favorite people. I think James Baldwin is quoted pretty heavily in his work. But it like switched a light on, because I've almost always kept these things separate, like my growing up sort of as a punk rock kid, and like what that means. And then realizing that like coming from where I came from, and sort of the lack of permanence that existed in my life, I stopped collecting records. I stopped, really engaging or indulging in those things. And, when I'm in my early 40s and my wife is like, so what do you want for Christmas, from my mom? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, you should get a turntable. And then I'm like, I don't know. Like, if I get a turntable, then I got to buy records. And what if I can't afford to buy records? And, it just spiral into this place, because I'm thinking about this in terms of permanence. Like, do I have the space or the room to even have these things? And the answer is yes. And so there's been this incredible sort of cathartic process for me in revisiting this music and revisiting this genre. And so you can see it in that mural, because Sage is 14 now, and she's been listening to this stuff for several years, and she loves this music. And her first show, I took her to the Misfits last summer, the original lineup with.
I was there at Fiddler's Green.
Yeah. I was working on a mural for Crush, and Sage was with me.
Nice.
And I got a call from someone, and he's just like, hey, I got 2 tickets to this if you want to go. And I asked her if she wanted to go. And so that was her first show as a Misfits concert, which was super cool for her. Makes me feel like I'm doing okay as a dad. And there's this crossover of punk rock, and that has also crossed over into this other set of work. So they're related, even though they're not the same. They don't even look the same. But this other work where I've reappropriated old comic book images from the 40s and 50s of Indians, and have not just repurposed and reappropriated the images, but I've also taken out the dialogue, and I've replaced the dialogue with lyrics from punk rock songs that resonate with the Indigenous struggle. So like there's this DOA song called That's Progress, and it's about gentrification. And gentrification is not the same as Indian removal, but a lot of the language is similar. And so the first piece I did over at Crush was actually a version of this one. And so it's a DOA song, and it says, because I don't know if that's backwards or not, you're evicted, it's time to leave. It don't matter if you've been here 30 years.
Wow.
So, and one of the mediums I'm playing with is wood engraving. So this is, that's all this is a wood engraving. But it's that sort of looking at or considering the perspective of struggle and disenfranchisement through this music that has spoken to me as a young person, and honestly still speaks to me, and being able to sort of apply it to these other spaces of appropriation, which has to do with representation, it has to do with stereotype, it has to do with all these things. But what I'm ultimately doing is I'm creating these images of natives and colonials where the natives are always winning. And how that's so novel is kind of beyond me, but it's a novel concept. It's a novel idea that all of these images, the natives are winning. But this tie-in has just created this whole new thing that I'm doing, where it's just opened the floodgates of ideas and intersection and representation and subcultures and like modern Indigenous identity. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What is it, how does it speak? And how does it speak to other people who are not Native? And how does it speak to people that are Native? And it's just been this really, as a human, it's been an awesome sort of process. As an artist, it's been exciting because I'm dipping into that sort of print style work, like the mural is set up in, I'm also dipping into comic book styles, which I haven't done since high school. And then I'm also still going into these spaces where I'm like looking at images that can exist on a wall and exist in a painting and exist in a sticker and exist in a print. And so working in all these different mediums for, one specific subject. And it's honestly just been really, really exciting to like piece all these things together.
Yeah, I can feel the energy coming off you there, just talking about that excitement. I think you and I are about the same age. I was born in 75.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I remembered that. And thinking about you growing up you were in Park City, but that's pretty close to Salt Lake City,
Yeah.
which was not it's another city that has a lot of assumptions about it, but had a pretty strong punk scene. And I grew up in Seattle at the same time. I went to high school in Seattle and became really good friends with a lot of punks. And I was always kind of scared by punks when I was younger. And then I was 18, 19, I worked on Capitol Hill in Seattle and made all these friends. And I was like, this is the coolest group of people, so accepting, and the whole social justice focus of, punk rock. Obviously no group of people is perfect. They're all humans, but there was this sort of projection of punks as this violent anarchist basically group, and maybe the anarchist part is true, but there was such a culture of taking care of each other, that I found in that community. Anyways, but I was thinking about you, making all these connections, and it's like all this years later, and then it's all coming full circle, and then what you're showing though is so fresh. Like that is a really different take on it. It's a remix with you're sort of taking control of the narrative, which is really interesting.
Can I show you some more?
Yeah, I'd love to see more.
So this is from a Misfits song called Last Caress, of which the lyrics are terrible, but I actually split the lyrics up. So the colonialist, he's saying, I've got something to say. I killed your baby today. It doesn't matter much to me as long as it's dead. And the native is choking him out and saying, sweet, lovely death, I'm waiting for your death. For your breath, come sweet death, one last caress, as though what he's doing to him is a caress of some type. And taking like those lyrics and creating something that like is true, maybe it's not historically accurate, but it's true. It sounds like it could be true. It's part of that struggle. But also in that situation, this isn't too much different from where we are right now, that as people who have this sort of mindset are saying their things, before they get COVID or before they, before elections happen or whatever, like they are throwing out terrible things, even in the midst of this, but that there still is a dichotomy that's happening. The natives are winning in this image. And using those things to sort of, create, this is actually from a Bad Brain song. You Can't Hurt Me. Why I'm Banned in DC is from a song called Banned in DC. But the native guy is punching the red coat colonialist guy.
Lyric is so interesting when it's layered like that. Yeah, and I was thinking with the last one, that's funny because we brought our 7-year-old to the Misfits concert, and we were particularly trying to figure out that song that you pulled the lyrics from, and it, some of the punk effort was just like a shock value, like I'm just gonna say shocking things, but when you put that in that context, and then thinking about kind of geographically how close you are to the Sand Creek Massacre site, which not a lot of people know, but there's many sites like that, unfortunately, where like women and children were just slaughtered, and but my mind went to that historic point, but you made the point that that's happening right now, and we may not see it in the exact same terms, but literally people are dying and people don't care.
Yeah, it's an interesting time in that respect, because I think that you can look at history and you can equate a lot of things back to like we're seeing repeats of things, and even though the context changes a little bit, a bunch of Nazis screaming blood and soil, who and honestly, like, historical context is so important in this way, as they're saying blood and soil, which is what ethnic Germans used to say about Jews, you know, before and during World War II. I mean, it was a statement about, like, these are our homelands and this is that. Of course, theirs were rooted in hate and was rooted in, ethnic genocide. But, when you have white boys whose descendants come from Europe that are saying blood and soil in the United States, it doesn't make any sense. And natives are like, really? Like, yeah, okay. But it also, that knowledge of history allows you to sort of dismantle those things and to be able to see those things. And so that aspect plays a really important part in my work in understanding history, like, making a reference towards the Renaissance for Take Back the Power mural, making, statements that are, that have some sort of correlation between the historical narrative of the relationship between colonialists and Native people and what that looks like. And all of those things stem from, knowledge of self and knowledge of history. But I also think that in order for us to really traverse the political and social landscape that we're in, like, we have to understand history at some point. Like, you can't possibly say Black Lives Matter and not know anything about, the Jim Crow era and what happened during that time, because otherwise you're just saying something because everybody else is saying something. And I think we have an obligation to those things. And so my work plays a lot in those sort of historical narratives as well. I think it's really vastly important. Which brings me to the last piece I was going to show you in person. So this is from a song by the Descendants called America. That's apostrophe M-E-R, like America. And so the settler is saying, we flipped our finger to the King of England. We stole our country from the Indians. With God on our side and guns in our hands, we took it for our own. A nation dedicated to liberty, justice, and equality. And the native is saying, does it look that way to you? It doesn't look that way to me, the sickest joke I know. And, this summer I did this mural. And then I also did a mural for Streetwise, which was along the same lines and subject matter as the one I did in Colorado Springs. It's looks different. When I was looking at Crush and all of the problems that Crush has, which are many, especially right now, that I knew that, while it has a lot of eyes on it, it is essentially street art going up in a neighborhood that has been heavily gentrified and has displaced Black and Latinx families from a neighborhood that has traditionally been the neighborhood that belongs to those folks, and that these essentially are going to be murals for white girls in yoga pants and white dudes in flip-flops. And so what am I going to do?
I think it's one of the top tourist draws for, like, millennials and younger in Colorado is that exact neighborhood in Rhino.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because I have a lot of friends that are from those neighborhoods that don't even go to Crush because it's painful for them, and it's just turned into such a circus. But at the same time, like, I'm grateful that I get to do that. I don't know, unless they make some major changes next year, I don't know that I'm going to participate next year or even try. But the piece that I did this year was exactly that piece. Can I share screens with you?
Yeah.
So I ended up taking that same piece, and I did it as a big piece on this coffee shop. So there's a lot of traffic where I'm at, but it was also a constrained space. So it's 10 feet by 12 feet, which is the smallest mural that I've done in like 7 years. And so what I actually did is I did a printout of this, and so that it looked exactly like the mural. So in the printout, I essentially will cut the image out and use the paper as a stencil, so that I can control the size and the proportions and the lettering and everything, which is also a process I haven't done in probably about the same amount of time, about 7 years. And but I wanted to put this out there because, in the middle of Black Lives Matter, in the middle of political disarray and elections, that the sort of feeling of disenfranchisement is felt. And this, 2003 Bush era song from the Descendants, like, just spelled it out for me. And so I included it into this piece.
Yeah, it's the scale of it actually. It's interesting thinking about the scale of different works of yours in public realm, and someone's walking into that coffee shop, and it's certainly larger than human scale, but it's like right there. It's like scaled pretty well to take that in a way that it's like 1-to-1 almost.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about
Accessible.
your process with laying out the text and everything, are you doing a lot of this on the computer, or is this like an old school, like cut and paste, kind of laying it out? You said on paper?
I have actually redrawn everything.
Wow.
I actually use an iPad to redraw everything. I used to do it on paper, and then you'd scan the paper, and now I can do it on an iPad, and then I can digitize it into a vector format. So I can make this as big or as little as I want to make it, so that it works appropriately. So the drawings are digital in their final form, but they are drawn out like I draw them out. And then I can take them and I can get it printed. Like, I could do a wheat paste of this if I wanted to, of the same thing.
Yeah.
But in this case, the spray paint's more permanent, and the line work looks pretty on point. I was pretty happy with how.
That's pretty great.
It always surprises me when I do this process.
It's I mean, just the scale of the work you've taken on recently is really impressive. But then thinking about zine culture and comics, and sort of history of how the technical side of those. But it's interesting the process you're taking, this historic drawing, basically a comic book drawing, and digitizing it, but then you're allowing it to exist in a way where you can reproduce it in much in the way comic books were, right? Like, they had this mass production. Not saying that you're mass producing this on that scale, but you have the ability, like you said, to take it across platforms, make a sticker, make a wheat paste. But yeah, there's probably this energy of the line and in the painted work that's really special. I can see it on the screen.
Yeah, the same is true. Like, so this is the Indigenous, I call it Indigenous flag. And it obviously looks like an American flag in its sort of general layout, but I'm using iconography from my community, which can also cross over into other communities as well, to sort of mix mash it. And of course, it's upside down. The upside down flag is often representative of distress. And being able to do this, and then I have stickers of it. And my last big installation, I actually had flags printed. So I got a full-sized flag of the Indigenous flag.
The sheen is really great.
Yeah, I was super happy with it. Although they put the grommets on the wrong side. So the company I printed through does a lot of Trump flags. I think they put the grommets on the wrong side on purpose. So so I might have to get another set done, but still pretty cool.
Really cool. That's interesting. I think flag, and flying a flag that's an artwork. Immediately when you talked about the upside down, I noticed that, and I think more people have talked about the upside down flag as a symbol of distress, and that being, there's such a shorthand with the visual impact of that, and even on a sticker scale, that you could really communicate a lot. That's sort of the power of that kind of work. That's a really interesting design as well. With the crosses made me think of grave markers, and I'm pulling in my own references from. But like you said, it crosses over, but it's probably also almost like a personal narrative embedded in there.
Yeah, I mean, I carry a lot of those symbols on me, and I think that working with textiles in a way that is not traditional, and allowing those textiles to exist in spaces that are not always obvious. I mean, they, even just with the painting here, you can see them, these things exist in my regular work, and have for a while, but I've been playing more and more with them. And with the Indigenous flag, it's actually my hope to sew one together, to be able to actually just make a large cloth flag that's sort of piecemeal together, that sort of exists, as a textile piece, which is not something that I've really done a lot of, but still is part of, I guess, sort of part of my genetic code. I mean, these are things that come from my community, things that have existed within tattoo culture, within my community and with communities nearby. And they exist on pottery, and they exist in baskets, and they ultimately can go and mean all these other things. That our Indigenous existence is not predicated upon feathers and headdresses. Sometimes it is predicated upon geometric pieces that are created and that are existing in works that have aesthetic purpose beyond decoration or art. And I think all of that is incredibly interesting too. So it's given me an opportunity to sort of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's so important. One thing that working with an artist from Montana, Bentley Spang, it's been probably 15 years since we put on a big event together. And he talked a lot about that when you require, a culture to present art as it was created, 200 years ago, and don't allow it to evolve, then you kill the culture, you erase it. And so the work you're doing is, super important with that, obviously, but also really, like you said, reflects the complexity of our modern space. But then I love how much history, how deep the history goes that you're referencing, the art history, geographic history of this area, and then your own history. I really appreciate seeing all those layers coming together. It's pretty much autobiographical in a way. It's all you, right? It's coming out of you.
Yeah. And I think that's what jarred me, again, looking at, Jeffrey Gibson's work, that it jarred me when I went into his exhibition, and I went in with their lead curator that put everything together, and was just moved by how personal it was. And so up to that point, and I've been kind of shifting into that place more and more, but I've often spoken with a collective voice, with a shared experience that Indigenous people are having. And I think that ends up sort of being low-hanging fruit for a lot of Native people, because it has to be this thing that, like, we only exist within the perception of ourselves, not within who we actually are. And so we have to contend with the stereotype. We have to contend with the expectations of that perception. And we don't oftentimes get to be whoever we want to be, however we want to be it. And so all of that points into this direction of being pigeonholed into one thing, so that when we do speak, when we do create work, it has to almost always have this collective voice, because the collective voice seems to make the most sense. That if we're going to talk about stereotypes, well, then we have to talk about sports mascots, and we have to talk about cartoons, and Johnny Depp and the Lone Ranger, and whatever else, like all of these things, because they exist within sort of a popular and a recognizable narrative. And so I realized, looking at his work, and then also beginning to look critically at other works along the same lines, other contemporary artists, that the work can be personal. It can be incredibly personal, and that I don't have to spell everything out to everybody. That these things can be subversive, and it's still part of the work, and it still exists, and it's still important. So that you could take like Indigenous identity, and you could add a little bit of punk rock to it, and you can have a little bit of design work that comes from your community that are in it. Those things don't have to be defined, because we in fact can define ourselves. And that is sort of the effort in establishing modern Indigenous existence. and how incredibly important that is to reclaim identity through not just our own communities and not just ourselves, but to also reclaim that identity through things that are part of our experience. Punk rock is part of my experience, growing up, and that's something that makes sense to me. And while it might not be overtly Indigenous looking, it still has something attached to it that speaks to me as an Indigenous person, that saved my life as a young Indigenous man. That being able to use those things creates something that can be recognizable while simultaneously redefining what those narratives are and allowing us to tell our own stories. So yeah, that's just something that has been this really interesting path for me in trying to realize that, like, I don't have to paint old men in headdresses. Like, I can paint whatever I want, and I can say whatever it is it needs to say. And I can also say nothing, that these things can exist as contemporary works of an artist who happens to be Indigenous. And anything that I create does not have to be recognizable to the narratives that have been thrust upon us and that have been expected by, contemporary American culture.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's really sounds like a major sort of breakthrough for you, recently too. That must be really exciting to just keep tapping into that energy. And that show was phenomenal. It was. I started following his work. The work started traveling, and he's shown all over. But
Yeah.
But that's so cool when that moment sort of happens, because basically you've been building up to it your whole life and through your work. But when you have that moment where you have a big shift like that with your own practice, I have an art background too. But really I consider curatorial a creative practice too. And I feel like this time right now where we're sort of going dormant in some ways, shifts are happening. I'm curious to see where those shifts happen, hopefully for the positive collectively, but also for all of us individually as we sort of step back and look at things. And it's a pretty special thing to get a moment like that where you get a sort of see a new way through whatever it is you're trying to work through, especially with creative practice.
I'm riding the wave for sure. It's like there's so much going on. Is that Sharon okay?
Oh yeah, I see it. Yeah.
So this is an installation that I did at the Art Students League of Denver in Denver, Colorado. And this is something that I've been working on, conceptually been working on probably since 2014. I almost got to make it happen in 2016 with the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian, there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of censorship that was happening, and I ended up having to shift my entire piece. But the concept was to have a full-size teepee and to essentially modernize it. So this piece is called Modern Indigenous Living. And so the outside is graffitied, as is the case oftentimes with urban spaces. I had a good friend of mine, JC Bale, who is sort of one of these old school graffiti guys. And he and I worked on this. And we have these references too, like Red Power is civil rights movement in the late 60s and 70s and beyond. There's a guy on the right, with a hand with a face. That's the American Indian movement symbol, but it also says BLM on native land. Black Lives Matter on native land. And so creating this space is interesting, and then filling this space with like modern wares.
Oh, wow.
And so taking furniture and indigenizing it. And, even the bookcases, there's these little pieces in this piece. The top part of the books, those are all by Native writers. And then the ones below that top one are all by white writers about Natives. And I've labeled them. You can see the labels there. The labels on the top part actually say nonfiction. And the ones that are written by white people about Natives all say fiction, which is not a statement about the books per se. It's a statement about like who gets to tell our stories and who gets to decide, what is real and what isn't. The performative aspect of this piece was just me simply being in the space and there's I've got semi-high waters and Doc Martens, with white stitching on them, and but I'm wearing like a high vest, which is sort of a note to Old West styles of dressing, where the vests were really high and usually made of wool. And so you have these old images of natives that have been sort of forced assimilated that are wearing suits with high vests, but they still have their braids. And so that is sort of a nod to those old sort of turn of the century images from Ed Curtis. And but then I'm also like, I'm wearing socks that have like native iconography on them. And then the mask I'm wearing, which is actually created by a native artist, is meant to be sort of a statement of native iconography, native made stuff, having to wear masks nowadays. The little red square that you can see on my lapel is actually the Indigenous flag. I had little acrylic pins made of the Indigenous flag so I could wear it on a suit.
Very cool. Wow. Yeah.
And
how many layers?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, even the little sign there says Columbusing, the act of discovering something that is not new. And, just playing in a lot of these things, like even the sculptures. The one on the left is a sculpture I bought at Hobby Lobby, and I painted it black. And you can't tell in the image because I think the image has been treated, but the black that I painted it with absorbs light. So when you actually look at it, you can barely tell like what are all the different depths of the sculpture are. And then the sculpture on the right is gold, like an idol, right? So it's an Indian holding the sort of a buffalo skull, which is that sort of old stereotype of the pensive Indian. And so that was meant to be there as, a funny piece. It's like, this is our idol. This is what we worship. And then, of course, the other series, the punk rock series I mentioned, exists within this space as well. Somebody broke in on the second day of this installation, actually stole a bunch of stuff. So that's why there's a sign there that says, "We may live on stolen land, but that doesn't give you the right to steal my stuff." And but the blankets are made by Native artists. The books that are written by Native artists. So I really just pulled in a lot of different elements to it. And it was just kind of cool looking too.
When was this?
This was at the end of, I want to say it was last month is when I did it.
Right. You were telling me you were finishing up a project there. Yeah, this is really cool. And did you work with the students, or you sort of, they connected with you? I know Art Students League has a really interesting cross-section of students there and has a deep history, but I'm curious how they brought the work there.
We did, so I actually ran some workshops with them 2 years ago, and I told the story, a little more in-depth version of the story of what happened in the Smithsonian, and I had expressed like my original idea was this. And there was a woman that was there who's no longer there, who was just like, "Hey, I really like your original idea." Like, they talked to the director of the league and basically said, "If we can raise money, would you be willing to do that here?" So we've been working on this for 2 years, and we were able to create my original vision. Originally, it was supposed to be filled with IKEA furniture, but IKEA their manufacturing is all messed up because of COVID. So I had to like piecemeal all the furniture from, I hate to say it, but from Amazon and Walmart, because those were the only places that really had anything. And just put something together. And so this second version, when we did this, we did do some workshops with young people, and really actually concentrated on the power of presence. Especially with, protests, and with people making signs for protests, and with Black Lives Matter being painted on the streets in front of Capitol buildings, that there is this power in presence, and talking about that in terms of general, like in terms of, art and activism, but also talking about it within the realm of performance art, and how performance art can lend itself to having power in presence, and not necessarily into a shtick or miming or whatever it is that people think performance art is, but that you can just simply exist in a space. I also ended this piece by talking about like what is Native, what represents Native. Like, am I more or less Native if I'm brown? Am I more or less Native if I live in a teepee? Am I more or less? So I had this whole spoken word piece where I talked about being more or less Native. Said, am I more or less Native because my hair is long? And then I took out scissors and I cut my braids off like right on the spot. And there was a collective gasp, and it was very dramatic. And but it was a statement really about like that representation. Am I more or less what I am because of what you expect me to have to be in order to be an Indigenous person? So
very cool. I remember talking to you, early on about performance work, seeing some of your performance work. I really love how this brings all of these elements of your practice together. And it's also very cool that I remember hearing, I remember now you telling me about that frustration, the Smithsonian, which is an institution you would expect to, really have higher standards and take on challenging subjects. I mean, it's supposed to be representing our country and the full multiplicity of that, right? That's very cool. I think a lot about, you use text, you're using it in the newer works there, referencing song lyrics, but you've always used a lot of spoken word in your performances as well. When you're generating that, do you write a lot, or is that part of your process?
yeah, no, I do. I have a lot of spoken word stuff. I kind of took a break from it, but I'm getting back into it because I have a new piece coming up next year called the Punk Pan Indian Romantic Comedy, and it is performative. I'm writing some original music to go with it. It's being facilitated by the Music District up in Fort Collins, which has this crazy history of music and venues, and it's just like I had no idea. It's this hidden gem in Colorado that is all about music. The drummer for the Descendants lives up there, Bill Stevenson. And so I'm writing original music, but there's spoken word, and it's about futurism, and it's about representation and social justice. And so it's bringing all of these different elements into it. So right now I'm writing a lot and trying to pull a lot of things together. The Arts and Society, I won a grant with them, which has given me enough money to get instruments and to get money set aside for hand drums and for building fashion things. And I also was able to get a laser cutter printer thing, so I can like work on some stencils and layering some things and creating even jewelry, creating earrings like with some of the iconography that I'm using, and being able to just create new work that exists in sort of a new space, and tying that into subculture of punk rock and that whole sort of genre. But yeah, so right now I'm writing a lot, actually.
That's really exciting. And when is that happening?
It'll be next May or June. It was going to be March, but I think that everyone's pushing everything back with COVID because they're just not sure. And if it's in May or June, we can do it outside if it needs to be outside. But yeah, I mean, I'm picking up guitars. I have a drum set in my closet. I have a very big closet, and it's now like a music room. And but that's also, I mean, there's duality to this because I mean, I love that stuff, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of work because I'm having to kind of figure a lot of things out. But I want my children to have access to those things. I want them to have access to art. I want them to have access to instruments. I don't want them to ever have any excuses for not having, the access to any of these things that, they might not otherwise have access to. And in sort of the spirit of DIY culture, or just creating stuff as we go and just trying to figure out the best way to make that work. But to tie that into something performative and to tie it into something that's visual is just insanely exciting to me. Yeah. The concept of the Punk Pan Indian Romantic Comedy has been in place since about 2014. I did a version of it at a theater in DC, and I did another version of it in February in Fort Collins. And with this grant, I'm able to expand it and turn it into something even bigger, into just something kind of crazy. So it will be the biggest performative piece I've ever done. And I'm super excited about it. But yeah, to answer your simple question. I'm writing.
Yeah. No, that's really exciting. Fort Collins has had some really weird press lately with, protesters and counter protesters up there. And then it's also, it's such a university town and really an interesting, culturally rich town in a lot of, in the sense that it funds a lot of art and music. And, but, that's a ag school, right? It's the agricultural sort of, it's this interesting intersection, I think, of rural and city. Like, it's actually almost more expensive in Fort Collins, I think, than Denver to buy a house right now. It's so like the whole Front Range just sort of shifting. I'm just thinking of the audience for that there. It kind of makes me think a little bit of Colorado Springs in the sense of having this really interesting intersection and mix, maybe a little more because of the presence of the university, balanced of a mix. Colorado Springs can skew very conservative, but I'm curious, when you perform, I saw you perform recently with your daughter at with Nikki Pike and the project that was part of the Art on the Streets in August. And I know performance has been part of your practice for a long time, but what is that like when you're in a physical, when you're in the space there in the, there you go, for the We project, which was part of Black Cube. This is the Denver presentation and the monument. Yeah. So what's that like? Like you're being it's so vulnerable. It seems so vulnerable to me. And then thinking about how public space is so contested right now. I mean, it just takes a lot to put that out there. But then on the other side of that is this extremely powerful opportunity to communicate these ideas, in this charged time. I'm just curious for you what that's been like recently with performance.
It's I don't, performance work to me, things just kind of shut down. Like I just concentrate in the space. And what's been really interesting about that too is as I've shared that with Sage, who is in front of the microphone in this image, that I'm able to kind of see it through her eyes as well, because she is a pretty shy kid. She's not very outspoken, but she's starting to learn that she has a voice. And the first time we did that piece in Denver, she just had to shut it down. Like she was really nervous, and she was telling me, and I just told her, I'm like, you just got to shut it down and just go. You have a job to do. You just got to go do the job. And so I oftentimes don't get time to reflect on these things until after, because there's just such a focus that happens. But at the same time, I don't know, man, I'm just such an open book about a lot of this stuff that I don't really, I know it's personal. Like in my head, logically, I know it's personal, but it's also just, it is what it is. It's just the work. And I believe that contemporary artists, particularly contemporary artists that are impactful, are personal about their work. And so that's been an important thing for me to sort of try to traverse. And I try not to just think about it too much, I guess. Just try to get in there and do it. There's so much thought and so much preparation that goes into these things that being able to kind of wipe my hands clean of it and walk away is pretty healthy for me to do. But I recognize that it's also personal. I mean, for Sage, putting her face up, in Colorado Springs was good and bad. I mean, we had a lot of media that came out, so we got a lot of coverage in the area. And for the first time, I saw her speaking to these issues. I saw my 14-year-old blossoming, and she said, I have a voice. Like, I can use my voice. I'm like, yeah, you can. You can use whatever you want. And then I hear her just articulating these issues, and it's just like she's been listening and internalizing and figuring out how she wants to say things is really incredible. But at the same time, I've used her face in a very public way. Mm-hmm. And there was a councilwoman in Colorado Springs that said that the mural was ugly and that needed to be torn down. And so there's that personal side to things. But, as a Native person, as a person of color, as somebody who, you could argue has been sort of, in the margins of the dominant culture. I'm also not surprised. This is the way things are. And as things shift, and as more prominence is being given to people who are traditionally marginalized, there is going to be sort of a death throw, sort of like, the painting, The Last Caress. There's going to be a death throw. People are going to say things, are going to do things as things begin to change. And so I hope things change, but, it's all part of the work, I think.
Yeah, what I hear you saying, and that is you're really taking that risk, maybe first and foremost, because it's so important to your practice, but then also ultimately it feels like it's really worth it to take that to be vulnerable in that way. I can imagine it being hard when it's your child, you're so protective of your children. And but I was also thinking while you're talking about her age, and that's such a metamorphosis point. I've raised two kids into teenage years now. My oldest is 23 and my son is 16, almost 17. And there's this point where they really almost go internal and get really quiet. Not all teenagers, but they shift their personality. I remember with my first teenager, I was really sad. I felt like I lost her child self that was so exuberant, and she went inside. But they kind of have to do that. There's such a big shift happening. And then I was thinking of what a gift it is for her and it's so cool that she wants to do this with you. She's clearly stepping up and taking that risk. And but what a gift for her also to learn from you in that way, and then learn from herself about what's possible.
I'd be remiss if I didn't admit that my kids have affected my work a lot. I did a piece at the Denver Art Museum in 2016, I think January, that was about blood quantum and the way that blood quantum is used to sort of regulate who is and who isn't Native, among tribes. It's a complicated issue, but the entire concept came from registering my kids with my tribe. And my tribe doesn't use blood quantum. You don't have to be a specific amount of this, of our tribal community to belong to that tribal community, but you do have to know who your family is. You have to know who you're connected to. So, I mean, I'm half, my kids, I guess, are a quarter. But because that doesn't play a role in, the blood quantum or how much Native blood you have doesn't play a role in deciding who belongs to our community and who doesn't. But it's still on the official paperwork. And finding that out meant me realizing that it's a part of the official paperwork because that's what the federal government requires when enrollment information is sent to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is part of the Department of the Interior, which is over land and resources. So I guess that is a really strange place to belong. But having those conversations with Sage and realizing sort of as we go through this process, as they grow up, as she realizes that, maybe she's white passing and maybe that is going to play a role in the way that she's perceived as a Native person, even though our tribal community has read her name and has said that she is a member of our tribal community. That there are people who are going to decide that she doesn't look Native enough, and what that blood quantum means, what appearance means, what representation means, what a contemporary Native person means. So all of that has played a significant role in helping me figure out what do these things mean, how do they mean, how do they exist. I don't want to just speak from my perspective, but I've also would like to be able to speak in a way that helps my kids to be able to sort of see and understand their place in the world as well, because they all of them carry their Indigenous voices with them everywhere they go, and it's something that they've sort of taken upon themselves, which I have informed, but it's still such an important part. But it goes to say that while I'm trying to give Sage as many opportunities as possible to grow as an artist, because that's what she wants to do, that's what she wants to be. I too am growing through the process of realizing that there are things that she has to traverse that I didn't, in the same way that there's things that I had to traverse that she won't, but we can share those ideas and we can build on those ideas and sort of inform our collective existence, based on those different experiences.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's so interesting when you're first a parent, you sort of going along your life, and then all of a sudden you have to sort of articulate, well, what do I believe? Who am I? How do I communicate to this child? How do I teach them? And then you realize how much you're learning from that and from them. And, I have a 18-month-old right now, and I'm just learning about, like, he learned to jump last week, and he was so excited about jumping, and we were all jumping with him. And, like you sort of relearn the world through their eyes. But you also revisit your own formative years. And for a lot of us, the pain there. I remember telling my siblings, I have 7 brothers and sisters, and I was the first one to have kids. I was pretty young. And I said, you can reclaim your childhood and sort of revisit it in a really powerful way, raising kids. And you can recontextualize it in the sense of having more understanding, maybe more empathy for your parents, understanding for their time and what sort of tools were available to them, understanding that when resources are scarce and you've got a lot of kids, because I, 7 brothers and sisters with an artist dad, I'm sure you can relate. Anyways, so just thinking about all of that, but then as they become teenagers, you start to shift your relationship with them, and they really, if you are open to it, teach us, so much.
Yeah.
They go into the world in such a different way than we did. And with my oldest, I always thought she was going to be this carbon copy of me when I was, I was really young. I was 21 when I had her. And so I just didn't have, my brain wasn't even done developing. And she quickly put me in my place of, no, this is my life, and I'm going to live it the way I want to live it. And then I realized, like, it's really, it's just a gift to be sort of custodian to them as they move into their full selves. But it's so cool to have that friendship develop, and how much you learn from your kids, through that. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think it's a good place to wrap up. I'm excited for what you've got coming up. It sounds like you're extremely busy. I've gotten a ton of energy.
I'm not. I'm good now.
Right this minute, but I mean, generally, you've got these projects percolating, these ideas gelling. The piece you just wrapped up at Art Students League. I love seeing how all these elements of your practice are really coming together, and that there continues to be a reception for that here, in Colorado, that you're getting the grants, and people are reaching out as they well should be. We're really lucky to have you here in this art community. So thanks.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
And thanks for being part of the series. It's really important to us. We fund all the creatives we work with, and so we give a small stipend as part of this. And I just put that out there to say that if folks want to donate to GOCA, we fundraise for 100% of our program, and this is what we do with it. We give it to artists. We realize new works and new projects together, and I hope, Greg, that we can work together in the future here as well.
You have no idea how much I want that. You came to my studio that one time, and I was like, because the space that you guys have is amazing. So
yeah, and it really, it's such I feel really fortunate to be sort of a steward of the space, and I really see that space as a platform to bring artists and really support them in creating new work, new experiences, tackling new ideas. So I would love to join forces here and work together in the future as well. So more conversations to come. But I'm excited to share this out. Our students will see this, our community will see this, hopefully your community as well. And we'll put your website up so folks can follow what's going on with you, and Instagram as well. I think you're on Instagram quite a lot, right?
Yeah. It's definitely more up to date than my website is.
Pretty typical. I sort of think it's so much easier to update than a website. I spent the morning updating our new website. I was like, oh, I know why. Instagram is much more successful. This is insane. So thank you so much for your time. This is really generous. Really a gift to get to spend the time in your space. I talk a lot about how the studio visit is typically a very private thing, and it's a space, and it seems like, from your practice, you're pretty comfortable with being, with being vulnerable, but sharing work in progress or sort of ideas you're playing with, that for some artists can be kind of tough. So, and then that's your very personal space. So I really want to say again, thanks for welcoming us in today.
No, I'm more than happy to have you. So I appreciate you thinking of me for this, and yeah, I'm glad to be here.